Okay, so we moved from parasites, now we're moving to other stuff that I wanted to talk to you guys about, just so you know. And again, I've only got about another hour to talk, so everybody good? I'll try to keep it under an hour. Anaplasmosis, has anybody ever heard of this one? This is a tick-borne disease. I don't know, this is kind of an interesting one to me because we tried to eradicate it in the U.S. Back probably 25, 30 years ago, something like that. Maybe been longer than that. I can't. Mike, do you know? I'm not saying you're old, but it's been a while.
I used to buy corn with you.
And the way we tried to eradicate it was again, this is a tick-borne disease, and the government built these troughs, these troughs that they would have the cattle to walk through. It was almost like doing a tick dip for a dog. But they used to, in the real endemic areas, so the areas where they had a lot of anaplasmosis, they used to make the people bring their cows, they'd walk them through this, essentially a tick dip, and they literally cover the whole body up to the head with this tick dip to try and kill these ticks off. I thought that was pretty interesting. But again, transmission is mainly due to ticks. Signs that you may see would be rapid breathing, jaundice, which means yellow gums. Cattle sometimes become excited and then they die. The first case I saw when I got out of the vet school was I went to a farm and the guy told me that he thought the cow had hollowtail. Have you ever heard of that disease? Hollowtail. This is all down in Bennett and Bonley. Is anybody down there? Anybody from there? Before I start telling this story. There are some wild diseases down there in Bennett and Bonley. But the guy told me he thought it had hollowtail, and he wanted me to come check it. So I walked around to the barn, and he had this Hereford cow and its calf inside the barn. Well, the cow took one look at me. She took off to run away from me inside the barn. She fell over. She got so excited she just fell over and died. And that cow was so anemic that the anaplasmosis had killed so many of her red blood cells that just by her getting excited, she could not get enough oxygen to her brain to sustain life. And that's what happens. It's usually the cows that are the animals that are most severely affected are adults. And when they die, it's literally they just can't get enough oxygen to survive. We can treat against this disease with oxytetracycline. Again, that's LA-200 or biomycin. This is actually a reportable disease, so if I find it somebody's heard, I do have to report it to the state. They don't do anything about it nowadays. They just want me to report it. They just want to kind of keep track of this disease. Again, we can spread it by any blood-to-blood contact, so needles, dehorners. So make sure you clean your equipment in between animals. Any questions about anaplasmosis? Malignant edema, which is a clostridial disease. There are several different clostridial diseases. Can anybody name some others? One starts with a T, ends with an S. It has a Aetna in it. Tetanus. Tetanus is actually a clostridial disease. And there's another one out there that everybody probably knows of. But they know it as BLACK. Yeah, blackleg. Blackleg is a clostridial disease. It's Clostridia shovii. All your Clostridia diseases this is a bug that lives in the soil. They consume it, usually as calves. When they just start eating grass, they'll consume it. It gets embedded in their muscles. And then under a moment of stress, it comes out and it literally just kind of takes over. So with the Clostridia septicum, or malignant edema, this can affect cattle of any age. And it causes swelling of the tissues, usually associated again with an injury or stress, and you end up getting a lot of gas in their tissues. Usually your only sign is death. You usually just don't show you many signs except for death. We can treat it if we catch it early enough with antibiotics, but the best way to take care of it is to vaccinate our cattle for it. So these vaccines are usually pretty cheap, and again, we're going to talk about vaccines here in a little bit. Our next one is Clostridia shovii. Again, Usually our first sign is death. It's usually your best looking calf out in the pasture. We tend to think that this is a young animal disease, animals between 6 months and 2 years. If you see any signs, it's usually just a sudden, severe lameness. It's like they just can't even bear any weight on the leg. And then if you feel those animals, a lot of times it feels like bubble wrap under the skin. It causes, again, that bug releases air under the skin, and it literally does feel like bubble wrap. It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird to feel it. Again, if we can catch them early enough, which is very rare, we can treat them with antibiotics. Occasionally, we do get into situations where we have a herd outbreak, and in those situations, we will go in and just prophylactically treat all the calves with antibiotics to try and prevent them from dying for it until we can get a vaccine in them, and the vaccine starts to take effect and help the animal to build immunity. Ringworm, I just wanted to mention it. Not typically a major problem, except it's just an eyesore. Ringworm is typically spread by contact. So if you buy an animal that looks like this and you bring it back to your herd, then guess what? Most of your calves are going to end up having some form of ringworm. People ask me, Mike's asked me this, is this a major concern for me? I really don't get that worried about it. I really don't. How do you treat it? There are 100 different treatments out there. If it's a show animal, and I grew up showing cattle, if it's a show animal, typically what we would do is get some Athlete's Foot cream and just put it on there 2 or 3 times a day, and that'll help to speed the process up and take care of it. But unless you're going to treat the animal every day, there's really just not a great treatment for it. So most of your commercial animals, I tell them just to kick them out in the pasture, keep them in sunlight, because all your funguses, none of your funguses like sunlight. And if they're out in the sunlight, that'll help to dry it up and take care of it a lot faster. If you are showing cattle, make sure that you disinfect your equipment. Make sure you disinfect your brushes, your combs. Just something for you to keep in mind. Foot rot. Again, this is a bacteria that lives in moist environments. It is termed foot rot, not hoof rot. Usually when I see this, it's kind of a herd outbreak kind of situation. It's usually because they bought an animal, brought it onto their farm, and that animal was still carrying this Fucibacterium species. And it gets localized into a wet area. The animals go down to the wet area to get water or whatever, and or it's the middle of February and it's just a nasty area where you've been feeding, and the animals become exposed, and animals that are naive to it, so your animals that have never seen it before, they typically become very sore, very painful. The nice thing about foot rot is it's usually very treatable just with antibiotics. And you can do a sanitary or a foot bath to try and help take care of it too. And in a dairy situation, they usually, where the cows leave the parlor, they've got a foot bath set up with some treatments in it just to help kill it. Pink eye, did anybody see this last year? Man, we saw a lot of pink eye last year. Mike had it here with his commercial herd, I think. Pink eye was particularly bad last year, and you know what? If you'd vaccinated for it, it probably didn't really accomplish very much for you. And what we found out is we did a lot of cultures on some of these because they just weren't responding to normal treatment. And we were having herds that have been vaccinated for pink eye have major outbreaks. And what we found out is that instead of the cattle species of pink eye, which would be Moraxella bovis, we were finding Moraxella ovis, which is the sheep strain. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and kill all the sheep in the area, but what I'm telling you is that it was a different strain, and your vaccines that we had last year weren't going to be effective against it. And hopefully we won't have that problem this year, I hope. But pink eye is typically spread by contact and by flies. So if you got pastures in the middle of summer where your grasses start to get up kind of high and the animals are going down to eat and they're getting exposed to those blades of grass constantly, that can spread it. Flies can spread it. Typically, the first signs you might see is excessive blinking and tearing, and then you start to see the white in the center of the eye, and then you'll see the reddening on the outside of that white. Treatment with antibiotics. This says self-cure. Actually, I meant to take that out. That was in that presentation that you gave me. I don't like to do the self-cure thing because the calves end up losing so much weight that it's just not effective. I also do not like to throw salt in their eye. I do not like to spray WD-40, throw vinegar, lime. I mean, I've heard so many different. I don't like to squirt LA200 in their eye. Those are not appropriate treatments. WD-40, not appropriate treatments. You can go to Southern States or Tractor Supply, pick up some LA200 or Briomycin, and it's very effective against this typically.